All right, buckle up, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic that might seem a bit niche, but it's actually super critical for anyone looking to make a real impact in Canada. We're talking about the surprising intersection of artificial intelligence and Canadian charity registration. Now, the appeal of AI is huge, right? It promises this amazing shortcut for really complex stuff, especially if you're, say, a new nonprofit founder just eager to get your mission rolling. Our mission today really is to uncover why relying on AI for this specific process, cherry registration, so often leads to frustrating delays and sometimes outright rejection. We're going to pull back the curtain on the real costs involved: financial, emotional, the whole package. Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding a really nuanced, critical process, giving you the intel you need if making a difference in Canada is your goal.
That's exactly right. And while the general buzz around AI and what it can do is understandable, Canadian charity law presents some genuinely unique challenges, things that aren't always intuitive. What's been fascinating and maybe a bit concerning, frankly, is a trend we've really noticed in the legal field over the past year or so. We've seen a significant influx of clients coming to us after they initially tried using AI-generated applications for their charity registration with the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA. And unfortunately, they faced rejection. It serves as a pretty stark reality check, I think, for aspiring founders.
Yeah.
That AI shortcut doesn't always pan out in the complex world of Canadian nonprofit law.
Okay, so it's clear AI isn't quite hitting the mark here, but why? What exactly is it missing? What's fundamentally, wrong with how these AI applications are presenting the case to the CRA?
Well, the first big reason, maybe the most fundamental, is AI's inherent lack of deep understanding of Canadian charity law itself. See, Canadian charity registration operates within this really complex framework. You've got the Income Tax Act, you've got common law principles made, those legal precedents built up over years and years of court decisions, and then a whole lot of very specific, nuanced CRA policies on top. AI tools, even the really smart ones, they just don't have that deep, current interpretive understanding needed to navigate it successfully. Take the four charitable purposes, for instance: relief of poverty, advancement of education, advancement of religion, or other purposes beneficial to the community. On the surface, they seem clear, but they aren't just checkboxes. Advancing education, for example, doesn't just mean handing out information. It actually requires structured learning, with measurable outcomes. And that's where AI often hits a wall. It might recognize keywords, sure, but it struggles to grasp the qualitative side, the subtle interpretations that make something truly charitable under the law versus just, say, an info campaign.
Plus, what counts here in Canada can be really different from other places, and AI might miss those crucial distinctions. And on top of that, Canadian charity law isn't static. It's constantly evolving. You've got court decisions, CRA policy updates, legislative tweaks like the recent modernization of the Income Tax Act's charity bids, AI systems. They might be working off old data, old interpretations, because they can't really reason about legal shifts in real time.
Right. So it's not just knowing the rules, it's understanding the unwritten rules, the context, the constant updates. And I guess that leads into how the CRA actually looks at these applications. That must add another layer of complexity AI struggles with.
Absolutely. AI has a really hard time navigating the complex CRA evaluation criteria. Registration isn't just about filling in the blanks on a form. It demands a pretty sophisticated grasp of how the CRA interprets applications against legal tests, and crucially, how to strategically present your information. For instance, demonstrating public benefit. Under Canadian law, that's not just saying we do good things. It requires building a compelling case,
Yeah.
providing actual evidence of tangible benefits for specific, identifiable parts of the public. That's a subjective element, really, and AI struggles there. It lacks that human judgment, that ability to craft a persuasive argument. And then there are things like the rules around political activities. Oh, those are particularly tricky and often misunderstood. Any political activity has to be nonpartisan, directly linked to the charity's purposes, and there are strict limits on resources used. AI tools, they frequently mess that up.
Okay. And what about the sort of the internal plumbing of the organization? The structure, the governance, that feels like another whole legal maze.
Well, definitely. That's a critical point. Another really common area where AI falls short. These tools often show a pretty inadequate grasp of Canadian governance requirements. When you set up a charity, you need a legally sound structure, one that can actually sustain your operations and meet all the ongoing CRA rules. For example, your governing documents, your constitution or bylaws, they must have specific clauses, like a dissolution clause. That clause has to state exactly how assets will be distributed if the charity ever winds down, basically. They have to go to other qualified dunnies, like registered charities. And the specific wording, it has to be precise to meet CRA standards. AI often gets that wrong. And board composition, it's not just about having enough people. The CRA looks at the skills on the board, conflict of interest policies, how decisions are made, ensuring effective oversight. AI can't assess the quality or the spirit of good governance like that. Then there's financial management, internal controls. You need careful consideration of Canadian accounting standards, charity-specific rules. It requires strategic planning. AI just, well, it can't do.
Right. So it sounds like a successful application really needs to tell a story, a specific narrative. And AI, even with all its data crunching, often just misses that human element, that persuasive story.
You've absolutely hit on it. That's a key failure. Missing strategic positioning for CRA review. AI applications just can't tell that necessary story. Successful ones, they build a compelling narrative. They explain why this specific charity deserves status under Canadian law, how it uniquely benefits the public here. AI-generated applications, they often read like, well, generic templates, you said it earlier. They fail to explain why this approach is needed in Canada, how it's different from charities already doing similar work, or why giving it status truly serves the public interest. The CRA also wants to see capacity. You have the expertise, a realistic budget, a sustainable plan. AI can't present that strategically. And really importantly, AI lacks that foresight. It can't anticipate potential questions or concerns the CRA reviewer might have and address them proactively in the application.
Okay, so the application itself is a minefield. But what happens after you click submit? Is it just fire and forget, or is there more back and forth that AI would struggle with?
Exactly. That leads to the absence of ongoing support during CRA review. Charity registration, it's rarely a one-shot deal. It's often quite interactive. The CRA frequently comes back with questions. They might ask for more information, clarification on planned activities, maybe even modifications to your governing documents. Handling those requests effectively requires a nuanced understanding of both your organization's goals and the intricacies of Canadian charity law. It needs real-time problem solving. AI simply can't provide that kind of adaptive human guidance through the review process.
Wow. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe, yeah, a bit startling. Let's unpack the true costs, the hidden costs of trying to use AI for this. I saw a figure suggesting one law group saw something like a 300% jump in appeals cases from orgs whose AI applications got rejected. That's huge.
It is genuinely huge. And these clients, the ones coming in after rejection, they face some really tough consequences. First off, time delays. Big ones. The average CRA appeal process takes about 5 months. And during that whole time, the organization cannot operate as a registered charity. They can't issue tax receipts. That means delayed fundraising, missed grant deadlines, frustrated donors and stakeholders. It really stalls momentum. Then there's the financial impact. This is often counterintuitive. Organizations going through a CRA appeal frequently end up spending more on legal fees for that appeal than they would have if they'd just invested in proper preparation from the start. And critically, not being able to issue those charitable tax receipts during this appeal, that seriously hurts fundraising. Canadian donors want that tax deduction. And it doesn't end there either. You've got potential compliance complications. Let's say you're incorporated provincially. If you fail to get federal charity status, you're stuck dealing with complex provincial rules, maybe even needing to restructure or dissolve, more legal costs, more admin headaches. And finally, something we see a lot is the impact on founder burnout. The sheer stress of dealing with a rejected CRA application, navigating a complex appeal, especially during those crucial early days. It often leads to burnout, instability, sometimes even the collapse of the organization.
That's just a massive blow for an organization that's just trying to do good work. Can you maybe walk us through a real world example? Like, what does this actually look like on the ground for an organization?
Yeah, we saw a really compelling case recently. A client came to us with an AI-generated application for a youth mentorship program. On paper, generated by the AI, it looked pretty thorough. But the CRA rejected it after a, get this, 10-month review process. The AI tool had completely failed to address specific CRA guidelines and requirements for organizations working with youth with vulnerable populations. The rejection letter pointed to things like an inadequate demonstration of public benefit, not enough evidence of charitable purpose under Canadian law, and governance structures that just weren't up to snuff for their specific work. So the appeal process began. And it was arduous. It meant digging up extensive new documentation, completely rewriting their governing documents, multiple rounds of really detailed back and forth with the CRA reviewers. What should have been, maybe a fairly straightforward initial application, maybe a 6-month turnaround, it turned into a 14-month ordeal. It delayed the actual launch of their programs by over a year. The founders calculated that the delay cost them conservatively over $80,000 in grants they couldn't apply for. They had to significantly scale back their initial plans. And all that time, they still had the burden of maintaining their provincial incorporation, filing provincial reports, all while being unable to function as the registered charity they intended to be.
Oof. That is a genuinely painful story. So, okay, what's the smart play here then? How do people avoid these kinds of nightmare scenarios? How do you make sure your mission doesn't get bogged down?
Well, look, AI tools can be useful for maybe some initial research, gathering general info,
Mm-hmm.
but for Canadian charity registration itself, it really truly requires the nuanced expertise that only experienced legal professionals, people who live and breathe this stuff, can provide. The smart approach involves someone deeply understanding your organization's unique mission, precisely assessing all the CRA requirements as they apply to you, crafting compliant documents that tell your specific story effectively, and, importantly, providing that ongoing support, not just for registration, but for long-term compliance, too. It's not just about dodging rejection. It's about building a really solid, sustainable foundation right from day one.
Right. So what does all this boil down to for you, the listener? Whether you're actively starting a charity or just interested in how this works, is this just, another legal bill you have to suck up? Or is it actually something more strategic?
Oh, it's definitely more strategic. Much more. The question isn't really if AI might eventually get good enough for this someday. Maybe it will. The question today is, can you afford to wait? Can you afford to experiment with AI while your important mission stays on hold, potentially for months or even years? Getting professional legal support right at the start, think of it as an investment, and honestly, one with a potentially massive ROI. Once you're registered, you can issue tax receipts. That opens doors to individual donations, major grants, philanthropists, potentially millions of dollars over time. The time, the money, the sheer emotional stress you save by getting CRA registration right the first time. It far, far outweighs that initial investment in expertise. At the end of the day, the human element, the expertise, the strategic thinking, the personalized guidance needed for complex Canadian charity registration, it remains absolutely irreplaceable right now.
Wow. That's such an insightful journey into what, might seem like a small corner of the nonprofit world, but is clearly fundamental for so many trying to make a difference. We've really unpacked where AI currently falls short for Canadian charity registration, highlighted those often invisible but significant costs of failed applications, and underscored the undeniable value of getting expert human guidance. So for you, our listener, maybe the final thought is this. Don't just focus on the flashy future potential of AI. Think about the immediate, tangible impact on your mission right now if you prioritize building that solid legal foundation today. And maybe ask yourself, what other critical compliance areas in your own field might look simple on the surface but are actually deceptively complex, still demanding that irreplaceable human insight over an automated fix? Something to definitely mull over.